In a world that often moves too fast, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness remind us what truly matters. The autumn rain had been falling steadily all morning in the small, New England town of Willow Creek. Inside the corner bistro, the warm glow of pendant lights reflected off polished wood tables, and the aroma of fresh bread filled the air. Thomas Mitchell sat alone at his usual corner table, his dark suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. At 42, he carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that comes not from titles or money, but from years of learning what really matters in life. His brown hair was neatly styled, and though his appearance spoke of success, his eyes held something deeper, something softer. He'd been coming to this bistro every Tuesday for lunch since moving to Willow Creek 3 years ago. It was a ritual that gave him peace in the midst of running Mitchell & Associates, the consulting firm he'd built from nothing. But more than that, it was a place where he could think about his daughter, Emma, and the life they were building together. Thomas had been a single father since Emma was just 6 months old. Her mother, his college sweetheart, had left when the demands of parenthood became too overwhelming. At first, he'd been angry, terrified even. But over the years, he'd learned that sometimes the hardest paths lead us to become the people we were meant to be. Now Emma was 8 years old, bright as a button, and the absolute center of his world. He was reviewing some documents when the bell above the door chimed softly. Looking up, he saw a young woman step inside, shaking raindrops from her light blonde hair. She wore a cream-colored sweater that had seen better days, and a long green skirt that nearly touched her worn shoes. In her arms, wrapped in a faded pink blanket, was a small child, maybe 2 years old, with wispy light hair and round, curious eyes. The woman's name was Sarah Bennett, though Thomas didn't know that yet. She was 28, but life had aged her in ways that numbers couldn't capture. Her face, while still young, carried the weight of sleepless nights and constant worry. Yet there was something resilient in the set of her jaw, something that spoke of inner strength. Sarah approached the counter hesitantly. The little girl, her daughter, Lily, resting her head against her mother's shoulder. Thomas watched as Sarah carefully counted out coins from her palm, her lips moving silently. The bistro owner, Mr. Carlson, a kind man in his 60s with silver hair and gentle eyes, leaned forward to hear her quiet request. Just one slice of the wheat bread, please," Sarah said softly. "And maybe a glass of water for my daughter?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but Thomas heard every word. He heard something else, too, the tremor of embarrassment, the weight of pride being swallowed down. Mr. Carlson's expression softened immediately. "Of course, dear. But why don't you—" "I only have enough for one slice," Sarah interrupted gently, her cheeks flushing. "I counted carefully. It's exactly enough." Thomas set down his papers. He'd built his company on reading people, on understanding what they needed even when they couldn't say it. And right now, he understood everything. This young mother wasn't here because she wanted one slice of bread. She was here because that's all she could afford, and she was choosing to use those precious coins to feed her child something warm on a cold, rainy day. Without thinking, Thomas stood and walked over. Sarah had turned toward a small table near the door, the kind of spot where people sit when they're not sure they belong. As she began to move, Thomas spoke. "Excuse me," he said, his voice warm but respectful. "I couldn't help but notice." Sarah turned, her blue eyes wide with uncertainty. She instinctively held Lily a bit tighter. Thomas smiled gently. "Please, sit down." He gestured toward his table by the window, where the view of rain-drenched Main Street was actually quite beautiful. "Eat first." Sarah shook her head quickly. "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly." "I insist," Thomas said quietly. "I'm Thomas, by the way, and I happen to have already ordered far too much food. My eyes are always bigger than my stomach." He paused, his expression sincere. "It would mean a lot to me if you'd join me. My daughter always tells me I need to be more social." There was something about the way he said it, with no pity, no judgment, just simple human kindness that made Sarah's resistance waver. Lily chose that moment to lift her head and look at Thomas with those big, trusting eyes that only toddlers have. "Pretty lights," Lily murmured, pointing at the pendant lamps. Thomas chuckled. "They are pretty, aren't they? My daughter Emma loves them too. Mr. Carlson appeared beside them, his eyes twinkling with understanding. Why don't I bring out the daily special for both of you? The roasted chicken with vegetables is particularly good today. And some warm apple cider for the little one? Before Sarah could protest, Thomas nodded. That sounds perfect. Thank you, Mr. Carlson. And so, with gentle insistence and nowhere else to go in the rain, Sarah found herself sitting across from Thomas Mitchell at the window table. She settled Lily on her lap, the toddler's small hands reaching for a cloth napkin to examine. I really can't pay for all this, Sarah said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Thomas shook his head. I'm not asking you to. Consider it a gift from one parent to another. He paused. Being a parent is the hardest job in the world. We should help each other when we can. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly. You have a daughter? Emma, she's 8, and she's taught me more about life than I ever learned in business school. Thomas smiled, his whole face softening at the thought of his child. What's your little one's name? Lily, Sarah said, her hand instinctively stroking her daughter's fine hair. She just turned 2 last month. 2 is a wonderful age, Thomas said. Everything is magical. Everything is an adventure. As Mr. Carlson brought out plates of steaming food, the conversation flowed more easily. Sarah learned that Thomas ran a consulting firm, but lived simply, that he coached Emma's soccer team on weekends, that he'd learned to braid hair through YouTube videos, and still wasn't very good at it. Thomas learned that Sarah had been a teacher's aide before circumstances changed, that Lily loved picture books about animals, that they were staying at the Pine Street shelter temporarily while Sarah looked for steady work. It's just for a little while, Sarah explained, cutting the chicken into small pieces for Lily. I have an interview next week at the elementary school. Part-time administrative work. It's not much, but it's a start. Every start matters, Thomas said. 3 years ago, I was working out of a spare bedroom with 1 client. Now we have an office downtown with 12 employees. He paused, watching Lily happily munch on a piece of soft roll. The hard times teach us what we're made of. Sarah looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected, understanding. Not pity, not charity. Just one human being recognizing another. Why are you being so kind? She asked softly. Thomas was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window. When Emma was a baby, I was overwhelmed, completely lost. I remember standing in the grocery store one day, Emma screaming in the cart, formula on my shirt, exhausted beyond words. And this elderly woman, I never even learned her name, she just came up and said, "You're doing better than you think. Keep going." He smiled at the memory. Those few words carried me through so many hard nights. I guess I'm just paying it forward. As they ate, Lily began to warm up, smiling and babbling. Sarah relaxed incrementally, the tension in her shoulders easing. She told Thomas about how Lily loved watching the birds in the park, how she was learning new words every day, how she had her mother's smile but her father's stubborn determination. Thomas didn't pry about Lily's father. Some stories don't need to be told all at once. When Mr. Carlson brought out 2 slices of warm apple pie with ice cream, Sarah actually laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise her. "This is too much," she protested, but she was smiling. "It's exactly enough," Thomas corrected gently. "Besides, Emma would never forgive me if I didn't have dessert. She says it's the most important part of any meal." As Lily dozed off against her mother's chest, full and content, Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. This time she didn't hide them. "You have no idea what this means," she whispered. "Not just the food, the dignity of it, of being treated like a person, not a problem." Thomas reached across the table and gently pushed a business card toward her. "I meant what I said about my firm. We're looking for someone to help with office administration. It's not glamorous, organizing files, answering phones, scheduling, but it's full-time, and it comes with benefits." He paused. "If you're interested, give me a call after your school interview. Options are good to have." Sarah stared at the card, then at Thomas. Unable to speak. "No promises," Thomas continued. "You'd still need to interview with our office manager. But I have a feeling you're exactly the kind of person. We need someone who understands what really matters." When Sarah and Lily finally left an hour later, the rain had slowed to a gentle mist. Sarah had Thomas's business card tucked safely in her pocket, a full stomach, and something she hadn't felt in months, hope. Thomas watched them walk down Main Street, Sarah holding Lily close, until they disappeared around the corner. Mr. Carlson came to stand beside him. "That was a good thing you did, Thomas." Thomas shook his head. It was a small thing, a meal, a conversation. "Sometimes the small things are the biggest things of all," Mr. Carlson said wisely. 3 weeks later, Sarah started work at Mitchell and Associates. 6 months after that, she'd saved enough for a small apartment. A year later, she'd enrolled in online classes to finish her teaching degree. But that's not really the end of the story. Because the real story is about what happens when one person chooses kindness over indifference. When someone sees another human being struggling and simply says, "Sit down, eat first." The real story is about dignity and grace, about how we all carry burdens others can't see, and how the smallest acts of compassion can change the trajectory of a life. Thomas never told anyone at work why he'd hired Sarah. He didn't need to. Her work ethic, her kindness to others, her resilience, they spoke for themselves. And sometimes on quiet Tuesday afternoons, you can still find them at the corner bistro, each at their own table, enjoying Mr. Carlson's daily special and remembering the rainy day when everything changed. Because sometimes grace arrives on the most ordinary of days. Sometimes it comes in the form of a warm meal and a gentle voice saying, "Sit down, eat first." And sometimes that's exactly enough. Remember, in this world, be the person who says, "Sit down, eat first." Be the person who sees others not as problems to be solved, but as human beings deserving of dignity and kindness. That's how we change the world, one small, beautiful gesture at a time.